So far, we have been using these validation annotations to check if input data is correctly formatted. But in real-world applications, validation goes beyond just checking if a field is empty or has a certain length. Sometimes we need to enforce business rules. For example, when creating a new user, we want to ensure that the email is unique. This type of validation requires querying the database, which is different from simple input validation. Now you might ask, hey Mosh, can we use custom validation annotations for business rules? The answer is no, and here's why. Because these validation annotations are triggered every time we receive a request in a controller. If some of these fields are already invalid, we don't want to waste a database query to check some business rules. So instead, we use annotations to ensure that the input is well-formed, and then we'll validate our business rules. So in this lesson, we're going to enforce a business rule to ensure that the user's email is unique in the database. So we go back to our user controller. Here's the create user method. First, I want to rename this method to register user because we named our DTO register user request. So for consistency, it's better to call the method register user. Now in this method, before we map the DTO to an entity and save it in the database, we want to validate our business rules. So we go in our user repository and check if we have a user by a given email. Now this query method doesn't exist in our repository, but because we are using JPA body plugin in IntelliJ, we talked about it in the first part of the course, we can create this right here. So we press enter. Now JPA body is suggesting the signature of this method. So we should give it a string and receive a boolean. Let's press enter. Now let's go to this method. So this is added to our repository. Now back to our controller. Let's pass the email, that is request.getEmail. Now if this returns true, we should return a bad request. So response entity.bad request. But instead of calling the build method, which returns an empty object, we call body to provide a meaningful error message to the client. Now, you know that in our responses, we are returning key value pairs. So here we can use map.of for the key we use email, and for the value we say email is already registered. Now here we have a compilation error because our method is supposed to return a response entity of user DTO, but in this case we are returning a response entity of map. To fix this issue, we should replace user DTO with a question mark to make this method more flexible. Okay, so this is how we validate business rules. Now let's restart the application and send this request to our endpoint. All right, we got a 400 response saying email is already registered.